know what? I between the last recording and this, I like sort of experiencing it so I can be conversational about it, but not. I like the experience of not overexerting in that regard and just sort of watching it as someone who's like, I'm reading a book, I'm watching a movie, and I'm using whatever knowledge that I have. I'll augment it for names and credits and stuff, but like, I like the idea that we can sort of enjoy that looseness with it because it is a conversation about, these things.
Because we're professionals.
Yeah.
We need to come at this as professionals, because what we have to say matters.
Yeah, oh yeah, 100%. So, you got to stick to it.
Got to stick to it. I mean, we do have our own perspectives, but again, folks, we are we're just like you.
Yeah.
We're not going to psychoanalyze this. I mean, this one maybe. This is a big.
Only if I feel like I need to.
If we need to, or go into more research
but you're right,
about
this
it.
one is one.
Even when I was like Googling more about the social context of this club. Oh, by the way, we are doing Fight Club.
Fight Club.
We didn't
Chuck
say
Palahniuk's Fight Club.
Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club. We didn't say that at the beginning, but that's episode 2. And I was actually just Googling like social context of Fight Club this morning, and I was like, there's a lot of papers on this.
Yeah.
And I don't have the time to read said papers.
Yeah.
Maybe in another life I'll do more research, but we're just gonna, play it by ear. Like you said, we're just coming at it with reading and watching in mind.
Yeah. Well, and this especially it feels very stream of consciousness to me. And so I think it makes the most sense to approach it from that way almost. Is to get at it from a sense of like, I think whatever hits you is the most interesting thing about it, and that's the thing that like, because there's so much in this that just drew me in, even as it like pushed me away.
Oh, that's a great sentiment. The entire time I was reading this, I was like, do I really want to be reading this?
Yeah.
But I did. Like I was fully entranced by the story the entire time, but also the entire time I wanted to run away.
Yeah.
So maybe we should give a log line, like
Sure.
we did our first episode, a log line of what we think the story was.
Yeah.
And in the coordinating blog for said episode, maybe you can add your log line.
Sure. Yeah.
In the comment section. So personally, I think this is a story of a man who suffers from insomnia, obviously, who starts to have, honestly, a split personality where his true nature comes to fruition in the form of another very anarchic, or how do you
Sure,
say?
anarchist or
Anarchist,
maybe is the word.
character of his actual deep desires that come to fruition as his own being.
Yeah.
It's a very posh way of saying that log line.
Yeah.
Guy's mentally ill, and shit happens.
Yeah.
So, your turn.
Area man has a bad week. No, I think he.
It's over the course of like a year.
Yeah. I think it's such a hard, because on the face of it, the setup is very simple. It is a man who is dissociating completely, disconnected from social norms and mores and standards completely. And as he dissolves into madness, he's giving off these social free radicals that spur violence and chaos by design. And like that, like in and of itself, is such a fascinating statement about the book. Like on its face, it is a very dramatic concept.
Yeah, the tag on the genre from where I watched it was drama.
Yeah.
Thriller. And I was like, yep, that's fair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it's also somehow neither of those, because it's Chuck Palahniuk is one of those writers that I've always been kind of fascinated by. Years ago, I was still living near Cleveland. Well, I was living in Cleveland and working in a suburb for a hospital system. And I was a parking booth attendant. And it was 3 days a week. It was Tuesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. So Tuesdays were the busiest evening. I would do 2 to 10.
Okay.
And then the weekends, because it was a suburban hospital, it was dead. I'd have one customer maybe an hour.
Oh, wow.
And so as a consequence, I read more in that year working that job than I think I ever have in my life. I covered a lot of ground, a lot of different authors, and Chuck Palahniuk was one of the authors that I was reading. And there's something about reading his work when you're sitting in a little corrugated metal box that's like smaller than, well, it's shorter than a coffin.
Oh, gosh.
And it's about as tall as a coffin. But it's
so
like
you're in a coffin.
You're in a coffin. And it really is a fascinating setting. Just be looking at this sort of raw, concrete and just staring through these like old plexiglass windows. It's just, there's something about it that really sets the scene for the kinds of stories he likes to tell.
Oh, did you? I'm assuming you read Fight Club in your coffin.
I read Fight Club in the coffin.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it seems like
actually,
the perfect place to read this book is in a concrete coffin, to be honest.
You know, what's interesting is that the first Chuck Palahniuk book that I read and finished in the coffin was a different book called Survivor. It's about a guy who grows up in a cult and then he becomes this media personality after he survives like the mass suicide.
Okay.
And it is just as bizarre. And it is truly bizarre, but compelling.
You brought up a word there that I kept repeating to myself out loud to my cat the entire time I was reading this book this is a cult.
Yeah.
This is this guy like he likes cults.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big crux of the story of Fight Club is the organized chaos that the main character, second personality or whatever, presents to the world, and everybody follows him blindly because they want a sense of chaos.
Yeah.
Because we're in such a regimented capitalist society that we don't have any other ways of expression, so they latch on to literally a nut job.
Yeah.
But I mean, do we want to go into the story, continue on this, or we want to go into kind of character to character, or we could do a general ranking right off the top?
Sure.
Up to you.
Let's discuss the structure of the story a little bit more.
Okay. I think that coordinates well into the actual production of the movie.
Yeah.
Because I think in terms of, I mean, we've only done this twice. This is only your second episode.
Yeah.
The editing style of the movie coordinated so well to the editing style of the book, in my opinion.
100%.
Of the structure of how it was written. Yeah, I was like, this editor did his homework.
Yeah.
And obviously the director, who is
David Fincher.
Mr.
David
fucking
Fincher.
A. David Fincher did amazing. No wonder the editing was on par.
Pittsburgh's favorite tourist, David Fincher.
David Fincher was probably up that editor's butt about the style of that editing.
He's known. It's no secret. His particularity with this stuff is so high. And I think you're absolutely spot on. Is that they captured the frenetic pace of the book of just pushing through the entire time, because you're absolutely right that the book and the movie are an act of running through all of this intense no man's land, this sort of emotional barbed wire to get to the catharsis, because that's what Palahniuk writes, and that's also the kind of story that I think Fincher likes to tell, these really grim journeys on the way to some kind of an emotional or psychological catharsis.
I would have loved to be in a coffee table with those two when they're discussing. They obviously, is he still alive? Is Chuck
is still still
okay.
alive. Yes.
All right, so they coordinated when they are both alive.
Yeah.
So I would say that would have been a very interesting conversation. There was a story element that I don't know if you caught.
Yeah.
Hopefully you didn't, because I want to feel special.
Sure.
Was the writing style from Chuck was very sparse, not sparse, but very like interwoven. So it would be like sentence, random thought, sentence, random thought, sentence, random thought. And I loved reading that because I have ADHD and my brain was like, ooh, this is nice.
Yeah.
And I was reading it. And then when I was watching it, the editing did the same fucking thing.
Yeah.
For the first one third or 1/4 of the movie, there was those flashback of images.
Yeah.
Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Where it was like image of hallway, flash.
Yeah.
It was actually Brad Pitt's character.
Tyler Durden is standing right behind the doctor.
It's just like flashes in and out, but it only happens until Tyler Durden, Brad Pitt's version of himself, comes into fruition.
Right.
And I bring that Easter egg back when they're talking about the little tapering of film reels.
Yeah.
Of how it's right at the top corner.
Yeah.
Right at the top corner. I was like, oh.
In the industry, we call that cigarette burns.
Cigarette burns. And literally, in the book, like I think the book did a little bit of a better Easter egg version of it.
Yeah.
With Marla, which is the, quote, love interest of Tyler Durden throughout this story, burning her own arm with a cigarette butt.
Yeah.
That's not in the movie.
Yeah.
Nice little clue in the book. I was very happy I read that. Yeah.
Because as we discussed last week, it's with Where the Crawdads Sing. A good adaptation shouldn't just be the same thing experienced again. A good adaptation should capture the core thematic elements of a book and the spirit of a book, but presented in a way that makes sense and translates to film because it is a different medium, and it dictates different needs. And I think with a story like this, like you have to find a way to carry Palahniuk's desire for that catharsis through, and it has to have that, which feels different than reading, because instead of reading, you are telling the audience you are showing and not waiting for the audience to tell themselves, which is what you do with a book.
So I think the translation of story structure, chef's kiss, well done in this instance.
Very creative, like made a lot of really interesting substitutions and alterations. There's even a funny in the book, obviously the bookends, so to speak, of the story are that up in that high rise waiting for the bomb to go off, and in the movie, they flash back to the same portion of the conversation at the end, and then Brad Pitt says, "Oh, flashback humor," which is like, it's such an on the nose, like it's such a silly like bit of dark humor that works itself in there. That is just it's a treat, and it's just an acknowledgement of the sort of metatextual act of putting a book on film.
Oh yeah, it definitely fit well. I felt like I was watching Chuck.
Yeah.
Like the style of the writing.
Yeah.
Obviously was the inner monologue of Tyler Durden and both Edward Norton and Brad Pitt character.
Yeah.
Adaptations of their own characters.
Yeah.
But that little like Easter egg at the end, flashback humor, like in both in those instances was like, oh yeah, it's the author being like, fuck me.
Yeah.
Well, even in like Stephen King's like the newer one, they acknowledge that Stephen King can't do endings, which love you, Stephen King, but you can't.
He's got a time.
He's got a time. And like that was actually like kind of more of that instance of throwback for me of them doing that in that adaptation, which we'll probably do that in the future. But like, like I took the easy way out in that instance, and he realized probably down the line that he did that, but the book's already published. Like he can't fix what he didn't like about it. So I think maybe if he was collabing on the movie, he was like trying to fix his own.
Well, and I wonder how many bad endings have kept books from the world. I wonder how many bad endings have pushed authors to that moment of like conflict where they're like, this story doesn't matter to me without an ending. I don't know how to end this thematically. Like how many brilliant authors just kind of gave up.
And like I personally saw the movie first.
Yeah.
Right. I saw the movie like 10 years ago.
Sure, yeah.
And I was like, this is pretty cool. And I never rewatched it.
Yeah.
I come into this with a little bit more of a, oh yeah, the world kind of sucks.
Yeah.
And also more being a big girl paying taxes.
Yeah.
And having bosses.
Yeah.
And having terrible jobs.
Yeah.
And going through points in my life where I was just walking one foot in front of the other, trying not to trip on broken concrete.
Yeah.
Some of the story, I was like, fuck, would I be in this call? Like,
sure.
They seemed, some of the characters, the background characters seemed perfectly happy.
Yeah.
They seemed nice to have no choice on anything. And I'm sure that's just the reality of cults in general.
Well, and I also think my experience is very similar because I read this book when I was 19, 20, and reading it again at 36, just like shotgunning through it, I felt the weight of it more. I think when you're younger, and I think especially a lot of young men don't take those things as seriously, and as they get older, they understand the weight of them more. And I think it also parallels what happens to men in America, because I think that's in large part, I think that's what Palahniuk captures in the book, is the sense of there is an emptiness in people sometimes that I think men become dysfunctional trying to fill. And they're already raised to be pretty dysfunctional in society. And I think it's one of the things that Obama said when he was first running for president, is that government can't do everything. At some point, you have to find a way as a culture, as a society, to fill the emptiness of people. And I think you're seeing those elements, and maybe he was seeing those elements early on that contributed to a lot of the groups that we see now coming up, that feel a strange sense, a vague sense of being left behind by something. And instead of analyzing why they feel that way, where social ills come from, where real stability comes from, they start to latch on to people who are preaching disastrous ideas and messages. And that's what culminates in the events that we've seen in the last few years is I think a lot of these guys, and I think he's a Pacific Northwester Palahniuk, and that's like anarchist central. I mean, coming up in Oregon, growing up in a mobile home and being sort of detached from his parents, and on top of all of that, coming out in 2004 is gay and talking about his experiences. Like, he'd talk about, people would ask him, like, is this about like gay men having sex and stuff like that? And he's like, man, whatever, just give me a free drink or what. Like, everything about the book screams to me someone who saw a lot of dislodged people, and a lot of them dislodged men, who just don't know how to function and don't know how to get to a healthier place in a healthy way.
For sure. I thought there's not a great dynamic, but a very realistic dynamic within both the book and the movie of how men process things versus the contrast of the female character Marla. I actually think Chuck did a great job with Marla as a dysfunctional female character. She read well for me. I don't know, even in Helen Bonham Carter's performance was like not my favorite, but like it was pretty good. The female perspective, it is like too much attention. For men, I think it's neglect to a certain extent.
Well, in an important way, because I think I think that's a very interesting viewpoint, because I think that what men don't get is the right kind of attention, is the kind of attention to from people who want to guide them to be healthier people. Like, they just don't exist. Those avenues don't exist the way they need to. Like, this is sort of a superficial thing, but, you know, growing up under the Bush administration, that was the first president that I was aware of. And the amount of pop cultural pro-violence, pro-war, from army commercials to messages worked into Transformers movies to all these kinds of things. You have I think a generation of men that got Call of Duty'd. And I think he saw that even in the late 90s. He probably saw a lot of these people who were thinking about growing up in an age of media where American dominance and power were projected, and you don't get a lot of healthy venues to find positive values.
Well, a venue, I think what Chuck was doing at the initial offset of how do we differentiate between Brad Pitt and Edward Norton's Tyler Durden? Edward Norton is Tyler Durden 1. Brad Pitt, Tyler 2. Okay. With Tyler 1, the support groups all through the beginning of him actually finding a cathartic release in the arms and crying in the arms of another man, Bob. Like, I mean, it was very non-traditional. I wouldn't recommend you going to support groups for things that you're not a part of.
Correct.
But I think that was Chuck's initial like avenue to say like, hey, that's a healthier way than Tyler 2's way down the line. Even though that's what Tyler 1 ultimately, it is him all along, goes down that darker avenue. But the first avenue presented by the author was support groups and healthy, cathartic relationships with, even in the men with testicular cancer support group at the beginning with Bob, men to men supporting each other. And then it divulges, because that support in real life doesn't exist.
Correct.
In the everyday. So he was painting a very good, realistic societal picture, for me at least, of like presented with the ideal option, realizing that ideal option doesn't exist in the world we live in. So in terms of like your experience with the life, I could never, think. But what you just said about earlier, latching on to something when you have a hole to fill. Right? When there's not, the ideal option isn't there.
And when you're in a fragile place emotionally, which I think is another thing that men don't know how to process, is the sense of fragility that you feel in life. It tends to get there's a certain kind of personality that is driven closer to force and aggression than to a place of reflection. And not for nothing, but Palahniuk comes back to support groups again in a book called Choke, which was also adapted into a film starring Sam Rockwell. which features a man who is, without giving too much away, because I think it might be a fun book to do down the line. It's very different. It's less intense, but thematically really fun. But he is a sex addict and goes to these support groups sort of sparingly. But the dynamic there is that this is a guy who actually needs this specific community, but keeps flirting with moving away from it and coming back into his compulsions. Mm-hmm. And Palahniuk loves to explore that concept of catharsis so much. It comes up, and he even, I watched his CBS News interview that he did, which is so funny to me that Palahniuk was like, he couldn't get his first book published because it was about a model who gets her jaw shot off. And now he's like doing interviews on CBS News where it opens with like, he likes to put up Christmas lights around the holidays. Like, because he's such a, he is, there was a sensitivity to him and the way he looks at human drama where he's not an edgelord. He's not detached about this. He's not doing this to simply to provoke. He's doing it because he talked about writing the book and getting up in the middle of the night and feeling anxious and nervous and stressed about things. And this was his catharsis, was writing out some of these really awful things and then balancing out that with the mundane structures you mentioned earlier of like the staccato of here's a terrible thing that just happened when you're on a plane and you're coming from this elevation and well we have an equation for recalls and then well this is why I was putting gasoline and whatever. It's just so transparent what he wants to do as an author, and not every author does that.
I think that was why it translated so well, because he was so transparent in the book. There was nothing to hide.
Yeah.
I'm not saying all authors hide, but if you present a bundle of knots to a movie production and say, here's my story, please unravel this, it's not gonna be a great experience. It's not gonna turn out as well as it could if you gave them a hand-woven, beautiful...
Some novels adapt themselves. Jurassic Park was written to be adapted. Jurassic Park, Steven Spielberg encouraged him to write it. Michael Crichton to write it because he was like, this will be fun and I can make a movie about this and whatever.
And we're doing that, folks. We're doing that in a couple episodes, so stay tuned. But one thing I thought one of the biggest differences for me from the book to the movie actually came down to performance, which I think would be a nice segue to talk about.
Absolutely.
After this break, because we're at 27 minutes.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back. And we're back. All right.
Great.
So performance in the adaptation of this story, I thought actually made some characters read completely not how I pictured when I was reading the book.
Sure, yeah.
Mainly Tyler 1, played by Edward.
Yeah.
Is it Norton?
Norton.
Yeah. Cool, I got that right.
Yeah.
Reading the book, like I said, I saw the movie 10 years ago, so I already had a picture of the actors. So when I was reading the book, it was the actors saying the lines in the book.
Yeah.
But I thought that in the movie, the backup of once he figures out that he is also Tyler Durden was more drastic in the movie than it was in the book.
Yeah.
In the book, it was like, okay, I'm Tyler Durden. I shouldn't be doing these things.
Yeah.
And he was taking some steps to like stop some of the things he has set in motion.
Yeah.
But in the movie, it was definitely more frantic.
Sure.
It was like, fuck, I have so much regret about everything that Tyler Durden 2 has done.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and fix this. I'm going to try and send Marlo away.
Yeah.
I'm going to try and do everything I can to stop this motherfucker from myself going through this plan.
Yeah.
In the book, it didn't really read that way for me.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, this sucks. Like, okay, I'm going to try and fix it. But I'm not going to go to the end of the earth to try and stop this thing from happening.
Yeah.
Because I think in the book, he inherently knew all along that it was himself.
Yeah.
So it was like not as I don't know how to really phrase that, not as urgent.
You're right. There was a different sense of urgency that I noticed. And I also, to be clear, the plan for Fight Club, which eventually evolves into Project Mayhem, is to, they become a sort of anarchist paramilitary organization, and they plan to blow up, I think, what's described as the tallest building in the world, as sort of the Parker Willis building or Parker.
I feel like tallest building in their vicinity.
Yeah. But their plan is to blow this building up
and
with
like another building
explosives
along with it or something.
And in the movie, I think they go into even more detail about. There's a bigger sense of we're going to crash the markets, and it feels like there's a lot of financial, and it probably is a finance district building. It's probably a considerable Sears Tower style building.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right, because in the book, you don't read the same sense of urgency that he has to undo his plans. And I think in the movie, they wanted to amp up that tension, because I think that's a thing that reads better than it plays. And I think for Fincher too, who already likes that pace, it made a lot of sense to build it up to that point in the movie, because it's such a sharply visual distinction. It's such a sharp cut, that panicked phone call with Marla where she finally confronts him, and then he wakes up and Tyler is speaking to, like, it is just such a dramatic transition.
Yeah, it was definitely more of a quick cut in the movie than it was. I mean, that entire transition took 3 chapters.
Yeah, 100%.
In the book. So like, it was...
Well, and even the chapters like flow into each other in interesting ways, where like he'll even be taking up the same events, presenting them through a different structure or a different like random staccato pattern of facts to back it up.
I think some of the details in the book kind of lend itself to how maybe problematic it was received by society.
Sure.
All the details on how to make bombs, for instance. All the different ways to like harm other people.
Sure.
And like, I don't think that the author inherently planned that.
Right.
I think it was just to develop character, but
Sure.
it offhandedly caused, I think, some issues for those groups you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
For those seeking refuge from their own, inner demons.
Yeah.
Detail wise, I think it was necessary to have in the book, but also detail wise, it was problematic for me.
Yeah.
Reading it, knowing in which the social context of which we live in,
Yeah.
how influential this was.
Yeah.
An aspect of that I was also talking to my partner when I told him we were doing this. He's like, "Oh, that's the red pill movie, the full red pill movie." And I go, I actually had to disagree with him. I don't know if you agree or disagree with me on that disagreement of it being a red pill movie. I didn't find it to be so one wing, rather it be anarchist, or even the regret of Tyler 1 throughout was more of like, hey, you shouldn't do this. Or was it a note to not do those things?
Well, I think also Fincher, because years ago I watched this with a commentary, and there were 2 or 3. I think one was the headline cast, one was Fincher, and one was Palahniuk. And the actors, Norton and Pitt, if I recall correctly, speak a lot about the philosophical underpinnings that they brought to it. And I think that I think Norton in particular was bothered by some review, I think it was Ebert or somebody, where they sort of lambast anarchy as an idea and a movement. And he sort of talked about it as anarchy in a different sense, a sense of philosophical renewal, almost from more of an Eastern philosophical standpoint. And I think that this is another one of those things where an idea sometimes just doesn't translate to film in the same way. I think in the book, it is such a barren stream of consciousness approach to his life that it just feels like an unhealthy person coming apart. And when it feels at time like reading the manifesto of an unhealthy person who is rapidly dissociating and rapidly decompensating. And you get the sense in the style of writing and the dialogue and how it's presented that this is always an unhealthy man falling apart. Mm-hmm. It is hard to distinguish this from any other kind of story. The movie feels more like it defends its protagonist a bit. Mm-hmm. And I think that it also, in the book, Tyler 1, who I think also people have referred to in the movie, they referred to Norton as Jack, in reference to, like, I am Jack's boiling rage, I am Jack's.
Oh, yeah.
The
or
device
any of
that
his,
brings up from the old magazines in the Paper Street.
That's one of my favorite parts of him, like, right. I am Jane's uterus.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my favorite details of the entire book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would refer to him as Jack or Cornelius or Rupert, or whoever he gives at one of those support groups.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
But
I think I will say, I think it's a credit to Norton that he does pull it back in an interesting way in the conclusion, where he is so under the thrall of Pitt's Durden that for so much of the movie he's just like going along with it, because he is he has not reached any sense of clarity about what's actually going on yet. So of course the delusion is feeding him. Of course the violent delusional feeling of in for a penny, in for a pound. Let's see how far we can take this. Now it's homework assignments. Now it's actual structure. Then there are committees. In the book, they talk at length about the committees that form.
Subcommittees, the arson committee,
the misinformation committee. Like
that one's my favorite.
Yeah, they talk about like developing viruses for ATM machines. Like this is becoming a paramilitary organization, and so he feeds into that point until it reaches a level of complexity where he looks at himself and says, "No, I know what I'm doing. It's impossible." When it was just violence, it was something I was doing to myself as much as to anyone else. And it was still unhealthy, but it was controlled. And now it's this. It's just, it's such a punch. And I do think that Norton carries that off nicely at the end when he finally comes back to reality. And they kind of upped the romantic tension in the movie between Marla and Norton.
I think so. I think in the book it was more of what Tyler 1 was giving to the audience.
Correct.
How it really was when he was like, Marla, get out of here. I don't want you to be here. And Marla just kind of takes it. In the movie, I think the example I cited before, when he gives her money, get her on the bus, get her out of town. He just wants to protect her.
You're the worst thing that ever happened.
You're the worst thing that ever happened to me. Like that definitely made, I think Marla as a character was much stronger in the movie than she was in the book.
Yeah.
Not that I didn't like her in the book, but she had her own issues and she definitely was playing victim in a lot of parts, and she was staying in an abusive relationship with Tyler 1 and Tyler 2 when she shouldn't have, which is just illustrating another side of trauma to everything of like you hurt the people you love, and then
another phrase that keeps coming up
and you always wonder why people stay in abusive relationships, and a lot of times it is because of the cyclical pattern of trauma.
Yeah.
So it was a good reflection of that, but also I was like, damn it, Marla. Yeah. Be better. Do better.
Well, because she's a ghost to him.
Yeah.
I think in the book, that presence feels so different because she is just this, to him, she's just a stray because he has no at this point emotional connection to her. Mm-hmm. He is Tyler's annoying girlfriend that comes around that I had to split support groups with, which is another very funny sequence that actually in the movie is genuinely quite funny.
Oh, I love it. And I want colon cancer. And they're in the store.
It's like the girl had done her homework. And like it is just one of the funniest lines in the book and the movie. And what I love about the movie is they make a reference to her stealing clothes from the laundromat and selling it. And in the movie, they have to find a way to work that in. And so it's this long walk and talk of them going through her business and going about her day, going to the laundromat, taking laundry out, and she's like, I'm returning some clothes.
Well, my favorite part of that scene was when Edward Norton, they get out of the laundromat, and he's like, you forgot half your clothes, and she just doesn't say anything, and she just keeps walking, and they get to the store, and she's like, you're selling these clothes? Yes, I'm returning these clothes.
It is so funny, and Fincher did a nice job crafting that dynamic in the movie. And I think it makes total sense for Edward's Tyler or Jack, whatever you want to call him, to be more of a doofus, a little more of a doofus. He feels like more of a doofus in the movie than on paper. And I think Edward Norton can do that so well.
Oh, he's such a goober.
He is because he's such an intelligent guy, but he's just so good and he loves playing it too.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I think that the relationship aspect between those two was better in the movie than the book.
Yeah.
I thought it played out better. I didn't hate him as much on screen when they were interacting.
Yeah.
In the book, like the one moment where they like freaking it was a good better transition in the movie because the book was just gross to me when they took her mom's collagen to make soap. I was like, that's wild. Disgusting.
Well, and I
And the movie, they just like, we just robbed a liposuction clinic. And I'm like, okay, no one's harmed in that. It's already like taken. No victims in this situation. But in the book, it was like, he just keeps being a shithead.
Yeah.
And
he is terrible.
He is terrible.
And responsible for those things in the book in a way that he doesn't want he doesn't feel as much in the movie. It's a different dynamic.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a better separation of the two Tylers in the movie than I thought in the book.
Yeah.
But there was an interesting thing that you said a long time ago when people were reading this book when it first came out was like, and also the author being gay.
Yeah.
The gay undertones.
Yeah.
Between the two Tylers.
Yeah.
In both versions.
Yeah.
For me, I mean, even at some points he's like, I lost his love or whatever. He left me, like my dad left me.
Yeah.
Is very internalized that. But then when you find out that they're the same person, I'm like, oh, he like lost the self-love he needed.
Yeah.
To be a decent person.
Correct.
So like
and
reading
maybe never had it.
Oh, he never had it.
Yeah.
Like he on the onset, he like I was like, oh, initially reading if they were actually two different people, I thought kind of gay undertones. But knowing that they're one person is just more of a self-love perspective for me.
It's love. It's the feeling of healthy male relationships that has always been a struggle. Mm-hmm. I think of like, how do you develop a healthy relationship with a mature emotional bond with somebody? And I think that in a lot of culture that carries a certain tension because you don't know what it is. And I think a lot of that does have to do with relationships with fathers. And another great concept that he keeps bringing up is that if our fathers are our models for God, that like maybe God fucking hates us. Like,
oh yeah.
And if you believe that you have no worth in society, then of course you turn to force. Mm-hmm. Because you're like, well, if there are no rules and nobody cares, I can do whatever I want. Like,
how do I articulate myself?
Yeah.
Fluently without coming off as a pansy.
Yeah. And how do I inspect myself?
Yeah.
Where's the opportunity to encourage self-reflection?
Mm-hmm. Violence.
Yeah.
Violence is a key factor in this book and the movie. Not just because it's called Fight Club, but even because of everything in it.
Yeah.
If there was I feel like if this book was called something else and there was no element of a fist fight in the book, it still would work.
Yeah.
You would just have to develop the paramilitary thing at the end a slightly different way. I argue he could have taken the transition from support group directly to paramilitary, and he would have gotten there.
Yeah.
Yeah, without the physical element in the middle.
Well, and I'll tell you what, maybe the biggest reason that I wanted to reread this book is that he wrote this in 96, 97. The movie comes out in 99. All of this predates, like the internet was in its nascency. You had message boards, you had like some messaging services, but it was still developing. This preceded by a number of years the places like 4chan, the places like early Reddit, which has become a more moderated place, but then that ultimately spilled over into additional groups with more nefarious funding sources, less regulated and oversought structures, and a lot of those guys, find themselves storming the Capitol because they meet and start talking about these violent concepts that a terrible man told them was worth deploying in his defense. And they did it. In many ways, Trump is their Tyler Durden. Trump is
Tyler Durden.
Their id. Because he is, which is hilarious to me because he's a nightmare.
Talking about a merch store.
Yeah.
Like Tyler Durden. Trump is Tyler Durden.
But he is. Because he is the Republican Party's Tyler Durden, and he came out, he saw all the terrible things that they wanted. And then that spilled over into these disaffected people who believe that social order is a threat to them and their identities, and they need to define it themselves. And that's how we find ourselves in these little pickles that we wind up in.
Little snapple pickles.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely, I'm glad that this story was written. I'm glad I read it.
Yeah.
It's problematic.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we had the same thing in where the Crawdads sing. There's just parts where I'm like, fuck, it's problematic.
Yeah.
But it needs to be said.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that what's interesting about the personality that he creates is it really does feel like the deterioration of a person. And I think that's what makes it feel different. Mm-hmm. Is this idea of like, we are aware of what we're seeing. This is a train wreck. This is a man in a society with no good mental health services to interdict.
It is a
stop.
train wreck right off the onset.
It's terrible.
The immediate, like the first 5 minutes of both the book and the movie.
Yeah.
You know it's not going to be a good ending.
Well, and as someone who like I've had my struggles with depression and mental illness, and I've found myself in, spending a week here and there under observation for this or that. And like there are fragile places in society. There are cracks in society, and lots of people fall through. And I think it's such a fascinating exploration of those people. And so yeah, there definitely are those problematic passages that you can see discussions of explosives and discussions of like gender and race identity come up as well, in kind of more of a flattening sort of tone, but in very much the flattening tone that a guy like this would see the world when he's not thinking in nuance, when he's not thinking about people.
Oh yeah, it read very selfish, both adaptations. You talk about the cracks in society, and there's all those cracks that people fall through every day. The fact that in the book and the movie, the police who are also involved with Fight Club, the fact that it affects literally everybody.
Yeah.
The overreaching like power that the has on society was illustrated very well. I thought like the inclusion of like that guy winking and random spots, just like an acknowledgement of it literally is everybody.
Yeah.
And that's a scary thought.
Yeah.
So
it's a pervasive problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So Chuck, you did a good job.
Yeah.
Making us realize that everybody has problems.
Well, and he talked about how he was working in a hospital. He was changing beds, and he would change the beds for people who had just died, and he would have these moments of reflection on like, this was a person. Mm-hmm. This was a person here. And you think about the fragile moments in our life when like our lives are ending, and the decisions and things we expect ourselves to think in those moments. And I think that's where he starts. I think that's where this story starts, is in a place of reflection on, because it starts right before, as we find out later, he is about to shoot himself in the head in an attempted suicide. And like, it's in those moments that the sort of universe unfolds, and we get these recollections of all this trauma and all this mental collapse. I just love that he finds those moments in the parts of his life in such an interesting way.
No, for sure. I totally agree that the reflection of everything that you mentioned, his personal experience with like reflecting on the meaning of life, basically, was brought in the story, because he even said, I don't want to go with no scars.
Yeah.
And so like he's going to scar himself up because he wants to be remembered.
Yeah.
It was like that sense of loneliness of like, I'm going to die and no one's going to care.
Yeah.
That is pervasive in literally everything.
Yeah.
That I think is probably people rank like being afraid of heights or sharks or being buried alive as like the top ranking things. I want to be honest, one of my biggest fears is being forgotten.
Sure.
I don't care. Mainly, I mean, I understand hundreds and hundreds of years from now, we're going to be just not even memories.
Yeah.
But it's that immediate generational, oh, that person died and they had no one.
Yeah.
They were alone.
Yeah.
And no one cares.
Yeah.
I think being gone and dying and no one caring or forgetting about you right away. That's my biggest fear. And that was illustrated. That kind of scared me when I was reading this.
Well, it's the curse of mortality and sentience. It's the dual curse of those things of, not only are we alive, we have to be aware that we're alive. Ugh. And we have to be aware that we're alive for 80 to 100 years if we're lucky. And in the span of the universe, that is less than nothing.
Oh yeah.
It's a very sort of broad and often stated idea, but it is true. That's a scary place to be, especially when you feel already fragile or lost or hurt by something, is the sense of the emptiness of the expanse of time. And then you find yourself in unable to sleep and constantly lost in that thought of what's the point?
Well, the what's the point was very well indicated or illustrated in the conversation when, and at least in the movie, it was when Brad Pitt was in the bathtub.
Yeah.
And Edward Norton was outside the bathtub, and they were talking about, oh, I went to college.
Yeah. All
right, Dad, I call you 25 miles long distance. What next? Okay, get married.
I don't know. Get married.
You know? And I'm sure that's perfectly good for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But then it's like, okay, I did that. what now?
Yeah.
Like the sense of purpose and that sense of like what I should be doing.
Yeah.
I know at least for me, society's putting a biological clock on me myself.
Sure, yeah.
I'm doing it to myself. I'm like, my timeline is a ticking.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's not enough hours in the day to get the stuff that I want to get done.
Yeah.
But at least for the characters in this book, they recognize that. So I think part of the chaos is them trying to fill and do as much shit as they possibly can. That's why Fight Club is every day of the week.
Yeah.
You know?
And there are multiple Fight Clubs.
There are multiple Fight Clubs. There are franchises like his dad remarrying every 6 years.
It's like a gym. It's like a really intense P90X for really disaffected men.
Oh, yeah.
And it launches and spreads in the same capacity of like, it's a thing you do now. It's a kind of working out, except that this is self-destruction, and self-destruction is better than self-improvement in this world because it's more honest, and it comes up a lot in the book where the secondary Tyler will say things like you are not at bottom yet. I need you to get to bottom. When you're at bottom, then
you're free.
You'll be what I need.
Oh, yeah.
You will, like, I don't need you like this. I need you at bottom.
I don't need you when you have the semblance of the shell of being a regular human being.
Yeah.
I need you to be a complete follower in my cult.
You need to
the
be
cult
filled,
of yourself.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
I loved Brad Pitt and Ed Norton, just from a physical aesthetic distinction. Just how different they are is so funny. And even as the movie progresses and you see Ed Norton look more cut and more defined, it's still
no comparison
because and that is his pronounced physical ideal of himself. He wants to be this Viking looking guy,
man from 90s, early 2000s. Brad Pitt, are you kidding?
Who is who I think is a talented actor, but is also like, it's part of the stunt of casting Brad Pitt. He is, especially at that point, just unbelievably gorgeous.
Oh yeah.
And like between this and like Ocean's 11,
oh my god,
where he feels, the funny thing to me about his character in Ocean's 11 is that it feels like a less psychotic version of Tyler Durden. Even the clothes that he wears are sort of like flashy, off the rack, weird like consignment shop stuff.
Oh yeah.
It's so hyper stylized, and it happens around the same time that I wonder if Soderbergh, when he was making Ocean's 11, was like, what if we made a joke about Fight Club?
Yeah, probably. I honestly think in the book they were having the way I read the book in terms of Brad Pitt's character and Tyler 1, Tyler 2.
Yeah.
Was as Fight Club progressed, Tyler 1 was still getting his ass kicked, but he was putting up a good fight, especially for the angel face boy. Right?
Yeah.
And Tyler 2 is also transforming himself by doing sit-ups.
Yeah.
And working out.
Yeah.
And he is more like on par physically with Tyler 1 in the book. That casting in the movie, he's not doing sit-ups. He is inherently already jacked, way beyond Tyler 1 or Edward Norton's character.
Yeah.
And I think they did that to save time.
Yeah.
For the workout sequences they had in the book.
Yeah.
I think it was smart casting.
Oh, I just think it's tremendous casting.
It's tremendous casting.
I can't believe it.
I thought all of the casting I thought was brilliant. I thought Bob's character casting Meatloaf was freaking awesome. Freaking killing Meatloaf.
Yeah.
And even like the secondary characters of the Angel Boy in the movie.
Jared Leto.
Like, I hate Jared Leto, but I liked him in this.
Well, again, he's a beautiful face.
Yeah,
and they use him as a beautiful face in this movie that he has to destroy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important. It's an important moment in the book and the movie because it's part of that experience of he wants the spirit of destruction to be the norm. He wants it to spread. That passage of like, I wanted to put a bullet in the head of every panda that wouldn't screw to save its species. It's just such a weird, sad, nihilistic beat, and it is part of that character's decline in a big way.
Thought this movie also was a little bit easier to adapt because of the time at which it was written.
Sure, yeah.
There's definitely stylistic elements of The Matrix in the beginning sequence.
Yeah.
You know, 100%. Like of the new tech that was coming out around the time of like CGI close-ups of like skin and the sweat and everything at the beginning. I definitely thought that this could have, but the book I feel like could have been set in the 80s, 70s or 80s, but the movie could only have been filmed in the early 2000s or late 90s.
Because it's millennial panic.
It's
and I think the book wasn't too far behind it either. It was in the second half of the 90s.
Yeah.
And there was panic at the end of the like there was the hysterical Y2K stuff where everybody was convinced that the banks were going to collapse, and it ended up being a pretty simple thing to fix. They just had to put some money into it. But then there's this thing. It's this in the Matrix, and to me, the first Blade, which also came out in '98, that all have that sort of like grimy, hyper stylized like. But they still had the infectious sort of music and sort of the club beat atmosphere. It's a lot of techno, and like the Dust Brothers do the score for this, and it is such a propulsive,
good
from the beginning. And that opening credit sequence of just the like violent color and text and like like it's just such a driving thing, and it makes sense to me why he would graduate from them to like Trent Reznor. Fincher would go on to Reznor because he only gets more industrial as he goes on as a director. So, and
also the theme and everything, the tone of everything presented in 1999 when this movie came out, resonates like it is a post 9/11 movie.
Yeah,
you know, like, and it was 3 years before. When it was made. But it translates. It was like watching it now, knowing it was made in 99. Knowing 2001. The panic. It was like it was predicting it. That's weird.
You're right, because there is a tension, but I also think that it's the thing of nobody knew what was going to happen, because the Soviet Union was behind us, or so we thought, in the early 90s, and we spent the rest of that decade really preparing for what comes next. And what is that? It's a new century. It's a new millennium, and we are calling I can't remember the author, the historian who called it the end of history, right? So we are at the end of history. All these conflicts have resolved, and trade and diplomacy will prevent conflict forever and ever and ever and ever. Then you have 2000 and 2001, which are two terrible years for America. A terribly run election in Florida gives way to a president who responds to the worst terrorist attack on American soil to that point. Well, no, there were far worse, and especially in the South during like segregation and all that stuff. The most
prolific of
foreign extremism. Let's call it foreign extremism in America. It felt different in a way that, like, we have never fully reconciled with the earlier acts of terrorism from the Klan and those organizations. This felt different, and it hit the psyche differently.
Oh yeah.
And all of a sudden, a lot of those weird fears about like societies built on platitudes and corporatization and all that stuff, they kind of started to give way, because we ended up with a society being run by people who liked that, who liked the normalization of violence from a social policy standpoint, and who wanted corporatization and those things to hold sway. So there was a breath and a beat early in the millennium, and then it finally gave way, and that's where you wind up, is this place of like sort of vacuous, weird mentalities that we haven't really dealt with or gotten over it.
Do you think, this is a question I asked you in episode 1.
Yeah.
Do you think that Fight Club will get a reboot? When do you think it will be? Do you think it deserves it?
Okay. Do I think it'll get a reboot? I'd say maybe, but maybe not in movie form. A couple of years ago, I don't know if this is still up, but the involved parties, I want to say Fincher and Reznor, were curious about doing a musical version of Fight Club.
Oh gosh.
That I maybe it stopped, maybe it died early on, but there was talks about developing that into a stage musical. It's also, there have been a couple of sequels as comic books, graphic novels that I haven't written. And so you do have some material to adapt there, which would be a sequel and not a reboot. But do I think this gets a remake? Yes, because I think of a lot of the political and social context that I think he predicted has come to pass in America in some interesting ways. And I think it's a matter of time before somebody new, a young director, wants to approach that material from a different standpoint. And I think Palahniuk has shown that he's open to other people's visions. He's not that married to he's not hyper specific about detail, and he wants to collaborate with people. So I suspect it will. When will that happen? Not yet. 5 years down the road, maybe 6. And I think it depends on how a lot of different current political undercurrents turn out and where winds blow and what changes. What was the third question? I'm sorry.
Do you think it deserves it? Because I think
Yes.
we said where the crawdad's saying, I
Yes.
don't think the source material is strong enough for a reboot.
I do. I think this is a story that can be retold and probably should be retold. I think it's a story. I think if A Star Is Born could be remade a million times, I think this can probably be revisited a couple of times, especially because I think it was a little prescient about some of the things that were in the past.
For myself, I think it will get a reboot.
Mm-hmm.
I think the comic book idea is great if they're going to do a sequel version of it.
Yeah.
I think the stage play or musical is. I was making a cringy face.
Yeah.
Coming from a theater background, I'm like,
yeah.
ooh.
I don't know if I'd like the show. I love Trent Reznor. I love Nine Inch Nails, so I would love the soundtrack.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd ever see it.
Oh yeah, no, probably would be one of those things I would just listen to.
Assuming
on
he's
Spotify.
involved. I think he's involved, but I'm not sure.
I think the timeline for the reboot will be more than 5 years.
Okay.
I think just in terms of political cycles.
Yeah.
I think it's too soon for this cycle. I think maybe the next cycle.
Yeah.
Because if you're smart, if you're going to make this story, you're going to time it with politics.
Yeah, sure.
In order to get more bang for your buck.
Yeah.
Right. It definitely, I think, would earn a reboot.
Yeah.
For sure. I think the reboot in the time and place or context of which it is made
Yeah.
would maybe make people like the reboot better than the original.
It's possible, yeah.
I think that's very possible for the story, that in the context of which it lives does influence fandom around it.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree that of all of your points as well, it's a great story. It's going to be remade. We just don't know when, and we don't know how.
Yeah.
Ranking. We did a couple categories last episode. I think we should probably stick to similar categories.
Sure.
Let's go casting / we didn't go as much into performance when we did, but not as detail oriented as performance. So casting, performance, 0 out of 10. Frank.
Man, I don't know if I can find a false note in the cast. I think this is tough because I'm trying to find fault with it and I just can't. And I think this is Fincher's strength as a filmmaker. He knows how to cast. This is a very small tangent. When one of the original suggestions for Gone Girl was John Hamm, and I told my friend Anthony about that, and we were both like, different movie, it doesn't work. It works with Affleck because Affleck has that same kind of public profile of someone that people feel a certain way about, and the casting just worked out perfectly.
I feel like Gone Girl with John Hamm would have worked more post Mad Men.
Yeah.
You know, when he gained more notoriety and
but
more
it's
roles,
a different movie.
But it's different than Affleck for sure.
So casting, I 10. I can't find fault.
10 out of 10.
I can't.
Would recommend.
Yeah.
Brad Pitt, Edward Norton.
It's perfect. It's such a
Helena
Bruce Banner
Bonham
Hulk thing.
Carter.
And then she is I love her. I love the walk and talk she does. She's a genius.
Brilliant. I'm gonna actually say 9 out of 10.
Okay.
I reserve 10 out of 10s for like when they ask me the pain scale at the hospital.
Oh sure, yeah.
Or whatever. They're like, people who piss me off.
Yeah.
Or who are like, my pain's 10 out of 10. How the hell did you walk into this hospital?
Yeah.
You had to be dragged in here or on a gurney if you're a 10 out of 10 unconscious, because 10 out of 10 pain is like unfathomable.
Yeah.
So I give my 10 out of 10s very, very rarely.
Fair,
so
that's
hence
fair.
why I give this a 9.
I waffled. I get you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will say that maybe that one point I could get if I liked some of the secondary character castings a little bit better.
Sure.
Like the boss or whatever at the car
I
company.
get you, but
yeah, so that's probably the only reason why I don't have a 10 out of 10.
That's fair.
Maybe because I'm stingy.
No, I get you.
Number 2, editing.
Okay.
0 out of 10 rank, sweeter.
Oh man.
It was a 2 hour and 19-minute movie. And the book was only little over 215 pages.
Gosh. It serves the story so well. It moves at such a smart clip. It knows how to embody the book while also being its own thing in a visual medium. It knows how to show. Man, just because I am not a professional editor. I come to film as an actor, so I look for different things and I think about things differently. I'm going to reserve this, and probably a lot of technical categories. I'll call it a 9 because if nothing else, it's just a sensation of like, I feel like I've seen 10s. I feel like I know when like Ella Schoonmaker did something for like, Scorsese, and it just like Thelma Schoonmaker does something for Scorsese and it just moves, and it's like Goodfellas, and it's just like, this is witchcraft.
Oh yeah.
And this is great though. And it's such a positive dynamic style, and I think it's terrific. So I give it a 9.
9. Cool. For me, I do have a little bit of a background in editing.
Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit of the detail in the editing that I loved, like the little cigarette burns at the very beginning. The little details here and there, the timings, stuff like that. That was very clean editing for the style of how choppy the style of the book is.
Yeah.
It was clean for the style it was given.
Sure.
I'm gonna give it 9.5.
Love it.
Yeah, just because I know how hard that must have been on the cutting room floor.
I am going to revise mine to yours.
9.5.
Yeah.
Again, my 0.5 is probably the length of it. I did have a harder time staying in the story for almost 2.5 hours.
Sure.
But I also question to go along with the editing. Would it be better as a TV show, or was it great as a movie?
Great as a movie.
Yeah, I agree. No TV show for this guy. I don't think it could be drawn out for a TV show.
It has to move fast. You don't want it's a movie. It is a movie, point blank.
Mm-hmm.
Movie.
Yeah. The other Where the Crawdads Sing had that maybe.
Could have been. I could see it working better.
Shoulda.
They could get more depth. Sure.
Yeah, but definitely movie book for sure.
Yeah.
We already talked a little bit about directing. I think we would rank that pretty high.
Yeah.
David Fincher, classic.
And it's really him coming into his own in a big way, because he'd done, Alien 3, which hit a lot of people the wrong way. Then he did 7, which was his big hit. Really defined him. And then he does The Game with Michael Douglas, which is a bit of a divergence, just because it's a different kind of story. Feels a little more traditional.
Mm-hmm.
But then he comes to this, and it's like,
there he is.
He's got some muscle now, and he can make his voice as loud as he wants, and it is so suffused with his personality.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
I would don't even think he needs a ranking.
Yeah.
No.
It's Fincher.
It's Fincher.
He's one of the directors that you rank to.
He's beyond rank.
Yeah.
For at least us. I know we're being pretentious filmmakers right now.
But I love him.
I love him.
I just love the guy. He's in the... You wouldn't even have to force me. I don't know where I'd put him exactly, but he's in my top 10 easily.
Oh, yeah. Top 10. Probably not my top 5, but definitely top 10.
Yeah.
For me, for sure. All right, last one. I'm going to cut the little tiny more nuanced ones that we had in the previous episode.
Sure.
But overall, story from book to movie, quality of adaptation, enjoyability all falls within this ranking. Overall, 0 to 10, Swader.
So this is an interesting one to me, because Jim Wools was the screenwriter, and he does not have a lot of credits. I think he's credited as writing Jumper after this.
Oh, fuck me. Really?
Yeah.
Jumper's terrible.
Yeah, but and also, what a different film, right? Like, completely different. Now, that's to say that I think there are a lot of people who work in the industry who follow a winding path, and they go on to producing. They work in the studio. They do this. They do that.
He probably weaved his way either into script doctoring or producing,
which is good money, good consistent cash.
Good for him.
Yeah,
good for him. But he did a great job with the screenplay on this one.
And he gets so much of that. Just the metatextual translation from page to screen, and he finds so many fun, inventive ways to really make those beats sing and really make it feel like a movie for people who read the book, but that also functions very much as a movie, which is what you want. That's a great adaptation. Mm-hmm. Can a person who hasn't read the book see this and enjoy it? Will they get as much out of it as someone who read the book? And they will, just in a very distinct way. Mm-hmm. So, damn. I'm going to put it at a 9.5.
Cool.
And I'm going to say that because as other people have pointed out, I think the ending in the movie feels a little more abstract than it does. There's a justification given in the book. There's a conclusion given in the book, which is that he winds up in an institution. He's constantly confronted by the illusion of God and the illusion of which reminds me of a movie called Pi, where the guy lobotomizes himself at the end because he's getting chased by. It's a Darren Aronofsky movie. It doesn't matter, but it's the same conclusion where like somebody puts a hole in their head so they can stop thinking about the world. And I think it's handled better in the book. I think it's a more interesting conclusion in the book. I think in the movie, it is such a weird hiccup to get to, admittedly, a very strong visual and in contrast musical with the Pixies. Where's My Mind? The Pixies I love.
Oh yeah,
they're genius. So yeah, I give it a 9.5 just because I think the ending is maybe not to my taste exactly.
I totally agree with you, Swader, but I am going to rank it a 9.
Fair enough.
Because the ending did bother me so much.
Yeah.
I thought in terms of wrapping crap up in the book, it was nice to know where he landed.
Yeah.
We know where he's at.
Yeah.
We know he was caught. We know he's there.
Yeah.
It made me sleep better at night.
Yeah.
Knowing that this person was getting help.
It's also, I will say what I like about it in the movie is it is kind of an apology to Marla. Like he does apologize. It was nice. Like I said, the relationship, like we talked about earlier, the relationship with them in the movie was better than in the book. Yeah.
But the ending for me, in terms of his character in particular, I thought I didn't love it. It was fine. If you never read the book, you could survive and rank it higher, but I'm going to give it a 9.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're wrapping up our episode too.
Yeah.
Yay.
I love it. Second one in the can.
This was a good one.
Yeah.
I had fun.
Yeah.
So thank you everyone for tuning in to our podcast. If you want to check us out on all the socials, the pluggables, Adaptation Pod. You typically find us everywhere. We have our website, adaptationpod.com, which will have all links to where you can listen to this beautiful podcast.
Oh yeah.
Also Zencast and everything in between will host it. So find us where you listen to your podcast, like, subscribe, review, and we'll see you next time.
Yep.
Or hear you next time.
Yep.
How do I say that? I don't know. Okay. Bye.
Bye.